The Global Game and Africa's Role, A Call for Unity and Action. Speech by PLO Lumumba. We live in a world that is undeniably interconnected, a global community from which no nation, no continent can escape. Africa, our beloved continent, must navigate its place within this global web, where every civilization acts in its own interest. The Chinese, the Americans, the Indians, the Arabs, the Europeans, they all act with precision. But the question is, has Africa truly defined what is in its best interest? When we look at Tanzania, with a GDP barely touching $50 billion, or Kenya at around $60 billion, we see the disparity. These nations, some of the largest in East Africa, are dwarfed by the advertising budgets of Western corporations. Africa's combined economic power is overshadowed by individual countries like India or Brazil. So when China's president invites African leaders to Beijing, why do they all rush there, competing for a $60 billion loan package divided among 55 nations? The answer lies in our lack of economic unity. Africa is not lacking in wealth. Aliko Dangote, Nigeria's business mogul, alone could offer $60 billion. South Africa's Patrick Motsepe and others are not far behind. But what we lack is a vision that benefits all Africans. For in this global game, no one gives without expecting something in return. And Africa must understand this. The key to our future lies in education. But what kind of education are we receiving? Fela Kuti, in his famous song, "Teacher, Don't Teach Me Nonsense," questioned the relevance of what we learn. We must unlearn the miseducation that keeps us chained and re-educate ourselves to equip Africa for true success. We take pride when our children are admitted to prestigious Western universities, but how often do we celebrate the achievements of our own institutions? This is the colonial hangover we must shake off. We cannot measure ourselves by foreign standards. Africa's success lies in our own strengths and the decolonization of our minds. Democracy, as defined by Europe and America, was imposed upon us. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, African countries were pressured to adopt multi-party systems. Look at Congo, with over 230 political parties. Is this democracy or confusion? Why should the West define democracy for Africa when countries like Kuwait or Saudi Arabia are exempt from such scrutiny? Before colonization, Africa had its own forms of governance, rooted in our culture and traditions. Perhaps it is time we revisit these systems. Every election season brings conflict, but maybe by redefining our systems, we could craft something more suited to our context. Africa's unity is its salvation. Agenda 2063 envisions a prosperous continent trading with itself, yet we are far from this reality. The dream to silence all guns by 2020 has not come to pass, but we must continue to push forward. Today, Chinese companies build our infrastructure, and Confucius institutes shape our education. In 100 years, will we look back and realize how effectively they reshaped our minds? We must act, or else we will lose our grip on the Pan-African vision. In the global competition for technological dominance, we are mere spectators. As the US and China race ahead, Africa lags behind in fields like nanotechnology and 5G. We must restructure our education systems and take action. God helps those who take initiative, and Africa must now seize control of its destiny. Ali Masri was right. Africa produces what it does not consume and consumes what it does not produce. As I travel across Africa, I see the quiet presence of the Chinese. Many consider dining at Chinese restaurants a sign of sophistication. But what are we doing to promote our own culture and identity? Africa can and must be great. But greatness requires action. We must stop feeling helpless. Unity begins within at a regional level. We need to dismantle the barriers that separate us, different currencies, visa requirements, and disconnected networks. We must become as integrated as the United States if we are to survive in this global game. If I were to write a letter to our founding fathers, I would tell them that while we are still discussing the same issues they raised 56 years ago, little progress has been made. Africa is once again being conquered, this time more subtly. But I vow to continue the fight for African unity. The spirit of Pan-Africanism is alive, and Africa will rise, even if it takes 100 years. Let us act with urgency. The future of our continent depends on it. Africa will rise, but we must begin the work now. Africa must unite. Africa must act. Africa must rise.